Okay then, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be going over a slightly better way of making your own liveries for Tower Simulator 3 compared to what we did in the previous video. It does look a bit complicated at first, but don't despair. It gives you much better results with much finer control. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Okay, so before we can properly get started, there are some requirements for tools and assets that we're going to need to use in the process. So the assets that we're going to be editing are inside this folder, so you just want to download that. This will be the first link in the description, and then you're also going to need Blender. Again, this will be in the description, and then so will GIMP. Blender is a 3D model editing software, and that's what we're going to be using to paint on our liveries. And then GIMP is a photo editing software that we're going to use. So if you go and download them, and then I'll catch up with you then. So once you've installed GIMP and Blender, you'll also have this folder here installed. So all you have to do is extract that to the same folder, and then you'll have this little folder here, default airplanes assets. And then if you go into planes and then default, these are all of the default planes in the simulator. Then if you get your Steam library open, you can go here, manage, browse local files, airplanes default. Then we're just going to leave this open for later. And what we do now is we open Blender. So this is what it'll look like for Blender. You can get rid of that pop-up window by clicking anywhere outside. Then you select all of these, press your delete key, and I can just put this to this side here, and then we'll have the planes folder from what we downloaded on the other side. I'm going to edit the AJT0. So you're going to want to look for this FBX. If you don't have the file type extensions shown, then you can just look at type and look for the FBX file there. It'll also be the biggest file, so if you sort it by size, you'll be able to get it there too. And then we're just going to drag that into Blender and then just import with the default settings. So that is what it will be importing. So we can sort of minimize that now. We'll keep it open, but we don't need it too much. We can then select the model, go to the shading tab up here, and then this will give us our livery. Now we can then go to base color, image texture color there, and then we can hit new. So we can call this livery, and then we're going to want this to be 4096 pixels wide and the same tool. And then I'm going to set the starting color to white. Once we've got the texture added here, we'll see that we've got a white body here and that the entire livery is just a complete white. When we were in the layout tab, we've got this selected here. So if you go to texture paint, we can come over here and then just go to the paint tool and we'll be able to paint whatever color you want straight onto the livery. So if you want to design any patterns in Blender, you can do that. Or I'm going to be showing you another method to change some stuff around as well. So first of all, I'm going to go into the layout tab and then select just the engines, the tail, the wings, and everything else that's shown outlined in orange here. And then I'll go into texture paint and I'm going to paint the entire tail black. Okay, so now that my tail is painted in this black color here, I quite like that as a design. It's quite minimalist. It sort of looks like the Air Canada livery. So now that I've got this painted on, there's going to be a little arrow in the corner here. I've already pressed it, so I've got the properties out here. But if you press the tiny little arrow that's going to be in this corner here, this window will open. You're going to go to the Tools tab. The texture will be minimized. You open the texture, plus texture. Then you come down to this little thing here, and then open texture, and then get whatever image you want to overlay onto it. So I'm going to get my YouTube logo, like this. And then you make sure that the mapping mode here is set to stencil. So mine is, so you can see it's appearing here. I'm going to set it to the x-axis, so we are just painting perfectly on. Then right-click, and you can move this logo around here. Shift right-click, and you can zoom it. So I'm going to sort of set it to that kind of zoom level. And then it's just a matter of painting it onto the livery. So make sure you get the whole thing on. And if we go away, we can see, well, if we go to the shading tab, we can see that that's now been painted onto our tail. But it's only on one side. So if we go back to texture paint, we can go to the other side, go on the minus x-axis, and sort of paint in around the same place as close as we can. Paint it on again. And then if we go to the shading tab, we'll see that it's now on both sides. If you spend a bit more time, you can probably get it lined up a bit better than I did. I think I'm also going to paint the engines black. So I'm going to go back to my paint tool and get rid of this texture. And then I'll paint the engines black. You can see for the engine model here though, it's split into a couple of different parts. So I'm going to have to select them and do it separately. for when I want to paint each. If you want to speed up the process a little, you can come up here and select, instead of draw, you can set it to fill instead, and then wherever you click, it'll turn the whole thing into whatever color you have selected. Okay, so I now have my tail and my engines painted, and I think that looks quite nice. The last thing I'd probably want is to overlay the name of the channel onto the sort of main body, and I don't currently have an image for that. So one thing I would suggest is you can go into just Google or something, go into Google Slides, create a new one, and then you can just sort of add the text however you like, and then you can select the font. This is probably the easiest way. So I'm just going to type that in there and then put it in a nice font. So I quite like the Oswald text, or the Oswald font, so I'm just going to have it like that. And then you can open the snipping tool, take a quick screenshot of this, save it to probably your downloads folder, or pretty much anywhere will work, anywhere that you can access again. Doesn't have to be a good name or anything. And then it's just sort of the same method. So I'm going to go to Layout, select the main body of the aircraft, texture paint once more, and then I'm going to add another texture. And then this texture will be the one that I just created in my downloads folder. If we set image aspect, then it'll make it the right sort of dimensions. I'm going to put it on the x-axis again, zoom in so that this is sort of quite nicely placed. And then it's just a matter of going to the white paintbrush again and then painting over, making sure I get the whole thing. And we can see that Rattlesnake Aviation is painted right on there. And then if I go over to the other side, the -x as well, I can put it on sort of the same place on this side. Paint it right on over. Now we'll see that it isn't on the door, which is annoying. So just for the sake of argument, I'm going to put it over the door. It doesn't paint over the door. So Control Z, get rid of that. We'll go back onto the -x axis, put it over the door, paint this over, and then we'll go Layout, have to go over to this side, and then we'll select the door so that we're painting on this again. Texture paint, it won't have moved. Then we can paint over it again, and we'll put it over on the door. Okay, so now that we've got the name painted on, I think that's close enough to what I had envisioned. You can put a lot more time and effort in to make a livery that you're really proud of. You can copy real-world liveries, you can make your own ones, you can do anything that you really feel like. But you might be thinking, there aren't any windows on here. And there's quite an easy way to fix that, but it does look very complicated. So bear with me while we go through this. So this is where the Steam folder I told you to open earlier comes into play. So we've been editing the AJT0 here, and then these are all of the different default liveries that come with the game. So now if we open up GIMP, the photo editor, we will be able to close that little pop-up, and then we can put this to one side and then this to the other. Now we're going to want to add the EMF livery, and then we get the albedo that looks like this onto the GIMP page here, and then we're also going to want the default one, and then we drag that over as well. So we're just going to see the default one, and then if we hide that, it's the EMF one. Now if we click on the default one, so this one, the top layer here, and we go mode, it's normally set to normal, but then if we change that to difference, having scrolled down, we'll see this sort of weird blue monstrosity. And if we hit this little button here to merge it down, that'll make it the current layer and the only layer. Your little window here probably has this fuzzy select tool, the sort of magic wand. If you hold that and then go select by color, and then click any black part on this layer, and then press Control C, Control V, that will make a new layer up here. And then we can go down to the original blue layer at the bottom and delete that. That will give us this. And then if we zoom in, we'll see that there's black stuff here, where the windows are, and then it's the same up here where the windshield is. So we can now go File, Export As, and then if you just put that in our Downloads folder somewhere easy to find, and we can put it as a placeholder name, it doesn't really matter. So if we export that, export it as whatever it wants, it doesn't matter, and then wait for that little bar there to finish. We'll then be able to close that there. We don't need to save anything. We can then go back to Blender and go to the UV editing tab, and then we'll have this sort of texture here. This is the texture that's been painted onto the model. So you just press image here and then save, and then I'm going to put that in my downloads folder. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. Now, if we open GIMP, the photo editor, we're going to want to put the albedo that we originally made into GIMP again, and then we put our alpha in as well. Then we're also going to want to add our albedo on as well, on top of the GIMP file. So if we just drag that on top. So if we right click on the alpha that we had, we want to put alpha to selection. That will put the dotted lines around. Then we go to the albedo for the default one, press Control C, Control V. That'll make the new layer at the top. And then we can delete the default one as well as the alpha map. and then we can see that it's now added those window textures on, as well as the windshield. So we can now file and then overwrite the albedo that we originally exported from Blender. And now we can go back to the shading tab. And then I would suggest just disconnecting that. We don't want to delete it for the time being because it might be helpful later if you want to change something. So I'm going to move that to one side. Then if we go base color and then image color once again, and then we open the games folder again. So Steam, Steam Amps Common, Tower Sim, Airplanes default, AJ, and then default. And then this time, instead of the albedo, I think we want the emissions one here. And this is basically at nighttime, these are the colors that the aircraft will emit and the light that it'll reflect off the walls and the sort of surrounding area. Now this looks perfectly fine. It's got the white here though. It would probably be best if we sort of put a version of our livery on there. So I'd say we just do the same process as we did before. If you want, you can just leave it as the white one. It's not really going to make much of a difference. And it will be negligible. You'll only notice it if you go really close. I think we're going to overlay a new brush onto here. So I'm going to add the logo once again. And then we image aspect it again. So it's a circle. We go to the x-axis, scale it down a little. Well, not quite that much. Put it in the middle. This is sort of where it was on the livery. Again, you're not really going to notice much of this, so it doesn't 100% matter. If you want to skip this step entirely, then you would be perfectly justified in doing that. And then we paint that on, and then we can see it's painted on as well. And then the other side. Cool. And then it's the same export process. So if we go UV editing, image star, save as, and put it in downloads folder, and if we just call it emissions. Now that's the bulk of the creating things done, so I'd suggest just saving this file here, and then we can close it, because we're probably not going to need it. You only want it if you're going to make any changes in the future. So if we go back to our downloads folder, these are all of the things we've done. So that is my Blender file. That is the emissions, that is the albedo. If you're going to make more liveries, then you're going to want to keep this. But I'm not, so I'm just going to delete all of our placeholder files and our airplanes exporter file. So these are the files that we need. Technically, we don't really need this one. Now, if we go back to the browse local files page, if we go back to the browse local files page, airplanes, then we're going to want to make a copy of this default plane or this default folder. And then if we change that to, I'm just going to call it test. Then we go into the AJT0, and then I'm going to make a copy of default. And we're going to rename that. Then we're going to want to make sure that these are called the exact same things they are here. So for the albedo, I'm going to press F2 to change that name, and then Control C. I'm going to go into the albedo, F2, Control V, and that'll make the name the same. For emissions, we go to the emissions one, F2, Control C, then emissions, F2, Control V, and then it's the same name. We're then going to drag this into here, replace the files, and you'll see that it changes up here. And then now it's just a matter of integrating it into your schedule. So I'll put a link to a video in the top right hand corner, as well as in the description for the tutorial in which we went over how to customize your schedule. And then I'll catch up with you in the sim to show the results. Okay, and we've loaded it into the sim and we can see that it does work. The livery is in the game, it's painted right onto the aircraft and it looks quite good. So that's the tutorial over. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, it always helps. Just tells the YouTube algorithm to promote my video instead of someone else's. And if you'd like to find out more about what we were saying earlier about custom schedules for Tower Simulator 3, then that's going to be this video on the right-hand side of your screen now. And with that, I'll say goodbye.